Here we are. This is Let's Talk Bruh, episode 79 or 80. We'll see when we get this actually out. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this, this probably is new for y'all because this is new for us. Our first little venture into this video series that we'll be doing as the weeks and months kind of progress in 2020. I'm going to hop right into it and kind of introduce my lovely panel of guests. I'll start with my right, Preston Mitchum. Would you go ahead and tell the people a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. Preston Mitchum, black queer feminist. I'm also a policy nerd, so I throw that in there every once in a while. I'm originally from Ohio, so Midwest the time. South and the Midwest are always going to be the best, so I'm a little biased.
Okay. Rasheed Copeland in the building.
Peace. Rasheed Copeland. I'm born and raised Washingtonian, Southeast Quadrant, father and poet.
Okay. Last but not least, Geronimo on the mic again.
Geronimo Collins, urban culture, lifestyle enthusiast, originally from PG County, Maryland. The man about town, thirst for knowledge always.
Okay, I like that. So give y'all a little brief introduction before we hop into this and give y'all what y'all came here for. And this is new. This is new for us. Trying to tackle a very broad topic in the state of black masculinity. I know it sounds like we're going to try to boil the ocean today, but we'll do our best. And like as we do on Let's Talk, where we want to get vulnerable. We want to talk about our personal stuff, but also get into some kind of current events, what we kind of see in masculinity as it's presented within the world. So as far as black masculinity, I remember when Issa Rae dropped season 3 of Insecure. In an interview, she said that, I really want to look at how black masculinity impacts black women. And there was a certain section of Twitter and black men who said, everybody gets to define black masculinity except for black men. And, I looked at that, kind of laughed a little bit. And I was like, it's interesting take. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's a feeling out there. So before we hop into it, how do you all define black masculinity as it presents in your life or as it just presents in the world? Do you have a definition of it? What does that look like for y'all? Because I know I have somewhat of a definition for myself from a personal standpoint, but what does that resonate with y'all when you hear the definition of black masculinity and how a lot of black men feel like it's always being defined by somebody else? Everyone wants to hop in. Feel free to, take the stage, take the mic.
I'm gonna let y'all kick that off.
So I'll say, for me, I think I'll share this before, actually. I usually don't have a positive definition of black masculinity, or at least I didn't have a positive definition of black masculinity from a personal experience growing up. One of the things that I share often, because I think it's important, is that I'm a rape survivor, and the person who raped me was a black man in my family. So I think I was always reared with this negative perception of what manhood meant, particularly black men. I mean, honestly, I don't really care about white men.
Facts.
Like, that's just not. I'm not a white man.
Right.
I'm not consumed by whiteness, and so, my idea is still like rooted in like what does it mean to like actually be in a black family, and who are the black men in the family, and negative experiences and relationships with my uncle. And so I would say like my rearing of it was automatically negative. And I grew up in a house with 2 sisters and my mother. So it was just reared really by black women. And so what I come to understand and appreciate were black women and black womanhood, and that, right, like we could all have multifaceted experiences with folks regardless of gender, that would at least help us like build out our learnings and understanding of black men and black manhood. My frustration with a lot of folks, like even with that tweet, and because I remember it well. Yeah. My frustration with that tweet at the time was, I'm like, do we have many spaces where black men are just out here discussing like black masculinity from like an intellectual, organizational, on the ground perspective? And my experience is that isn't true, even among black queer community. So, oftentimes we get frustrated by other folks defining black masculinity when black women speak up against their negative experiences about black men. And that is what I found counterproductive. I'm like, the only time we're frustrated with the idea of black masculinity is when black women are sharing their experiences about us, then that is the problem. Yeah. But I think ultimately the real issue is like negative manifestations of masculinity, not masculinity itself.
Got you. Because I saw that criticism as well, and I'm glad you mentioned the point of like, when are we actually talking about this except from a reactionary standpoint? Right. Geronimo, Rasheed, you want to hop in as far as your own definition of black masculinity, or do you have a definition? Like, I mean, we don't have to have a definition. I'm not trying to stick you to that question, but if you do, if you don't. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever, I guess, intellectualized my ideas on black masculinity, so to speak. I grew up with my father, raised by my father. My mom's, still around for sure. But, just given the circumstances, my father raised me and my siblings. So within that, him being my model for that, was a broad range of what you could be as a man, because I had sisters. So he was doing hair. He was, it was just all the things that I guess might not be considered masculine things he did, but also did the masculine things as well, and even the hyper masculine things. So my understanding of manhood and masculinity has always been a very a range, so to speak. It's a spectrum. You can have everything in it. There's no right way to be it, but there are a few wrong ways, to be it, if that makes sense. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, it's always interesting. Like sometimes we get a certain definition or presentation of masculinity in the home, and then it's like maybe try to achieve that. But then on the outside world, I know from my perspective, like my dad was never very much the hyper masculine dude. He was always telling me he loved me. So then I try to carry that out in my real life, and it's like, wait a minute, this shit ain't okay. Everybody else at school telling me, no, you can't say that. Don't get so close to me. Like, so that was often my perspective of it. Geronimo, how did masculinity look like for yourself, and how do you define it today?
Well, I can't say I have a definition.
Okay.
Other than, well, no, let me take that back. I would define it as something that just is versus it being this set of things and
set
behaviors.
Of characteristics.
Because I look at things within the past couple of years from a very spiritual and energetic place. And I look at, and from feminine to masculine, it just is. As far as my own experiences with masculinity, so it's a variety of experiences, both environmental, more so outside the home, and through performative behaviors, through behaviors that just are. My family dynamic was different in that, I know my father, who I could say, my father is masculine, but he's not, like you said, your dad is very hyper masculine. He's not hyper masculine. So my dad was a hyper masculine, but I think in terms of what I saw and how my family and my father approached me varied because, I wasn't always Geronimo. So, I identify as a transgender man. And coming up, my father, however, he would not, any interest that I had that seemed more like what boys would do, he didn't knock that. So, he had these huge fish tanks, so he would let me help him clean the fish tanks. I wanted to help him fix stuff, so he would teach me how to fix stuff and let me do it. He bought me computers and all these different things, and I tinkered with those, and nobody thought anything of it. You know what I mean? I didn't even last very long with dolls and stuff like that. All that type of stuff. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not going to tell you what I would do, but I would destroy them. And not because and please, anybody listening, do not take this as me saying I hated women because I just didn't do well with dolls. It just wasn't something I was into. Although I did figure out how to dye a Barbie's hair once. With makeup, with my mother's makeup. So
part 2 discussion, then we come back next time.
I don't know. I always was getting into things, but yeah. So with my parents and my father, I don't think my father really thought about it until I got older. And even then, I don't think either of my parents really knew how to engage me when it came to masculine or feminine because I biologically looked one way, but all my actions just without thinking went a completely different way. Yeah. So much of what I know of what masculinity or manhood is, somewhat from my father, because there weren't a lot of men in my family. That I came up around, and mostly outside the home, environmental, societal, all of that.
So you mentioned earlier if you had a definition for it.
It just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just whatever comes, But I mean, I want to save that. I want to elaborate on that later when we bring up some of the. I guess we're going to bring up some of the names of the gentlemen that you mentioned in the email. So I'll elaborate on that then. Okay.
Well, we're transitioning very smoothly. I think I like starting off with our personal definitions just to kind of give everybody just kind of a foundation of where we're individually coming from. And I think what's interesting about conversations like this is also diving into, so what are we in this moment kind of learning and unlearning about maybe masculinity, about manhood, about life in general. I think now that I'm about to be 30 in August, I think
it's not that bad. I might be the
Really?
oldest person at this table.
I
actually.
mean, y'all make it look good. You're making it look good right now.
I'll be 34 on Tuesday. I want to hear it.
All right. So y'all making me feel better. I got anxiety, like 30 coming.
Nah,
you'll be all right.
It's stressful. It's stressful out here. It's stressful out here.
The genetics still hold.
you good, man. Trust me.
I hope so. I appreciate that. And talking about maybe some things about masculinity or manhood or life that we're learning or unlearning about that process right now. I know for myself, I often find myself going in between, like, trying to unlearn, as a man, as a boy, I watched sports all the time. Michael Jordan was my hero. And I played basketball. So like that idea of like perfection in the NBA finals and competition and dominance and just being the best, like I've always applied that to my creative endeavors, like with this podcast, even with this video platform. And now I'm looking at like, is that really a healthy mindset to have when trying to reach folks, with love and like trying to actually, make an impact on people's hearts. So like, taking that competitive mindset and unlearning that a little bit has been something I'm struggling with right now in terms of like, yeah, I do definitely believe there's enough for all of us to win. But at the same time, Michael Jordan said, you got to beat everybody. So I'm like, I'm wrestling with that shit as I'm processing just kind of, things that I do, what I do in life. So I'm wondering for you guys, is there anything regarding your conception of masculinity or manhood that you're maybe learning about yourself now, or even unlearning and trying to reshape as you kind of, matriculate and get older? Anything come to mind for your, just as far as, your everybody has, a career that you're in and everybody has their endeavors. Anything as far as kind of wrestling with in this current moment?
So for me, right, I have always been, I guess, what you would call kind of a docile boy, so to speak. And so when these conversations started to come up as far as what masculinity is, and more specifically in relation to how it can be harmful towards our women, I always kind of took a step back. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not like one of these hyper masculine dudes. I'm not over here beating people over the head and all these sorts of things. But I guess what I'm trying to unlearn now is that you don't have to necessarily be this very rah-rah brolic dude to bring a lot of harm towards the people around you. You can do it in very subtle ways, like how you position yourself, even if you're not like this big dude, in relation to women, and things like that. So just recognizing that by virtue of me, performing masculinity, being a man, there are things that I can unlearn, whether or not those are things that mimic what we believe to be hypermasculinity is another thing, but they're still there. And so just trying to realize that and recognize that, like, no, you're a part of this as well. It's not just, because you wasn't like that dude that was out there like that. Like,
it's kind of like the episode of Insecure where Tasha
Right,
said you're a fuckboy. That's like, that hit me in the chest.
Yeah,
like,
it was
I've
who
been in
thinks they're a
similar
good guy.
conversations. That shit stung for a lot of people. For a lot of people on and off screen.
I mean, I think for me, I know for me rather, I had to really understand the difference between masculinity and manhood, and realize, again, going back to that, masculinity just is, and manhood perhaps might be conditioning or is conditioning and learned behavior, things like that. So a lot of people I was around, men and women, especially women who date women, it was always this thing where, okay, well, you got to get you a lot of joints. You got to have you a lot of chicks. And I'm somebody, I don't really like to manage people. And so I attempted this whole, okay, I'm going to just have me joints. I'm going to have a roster.
That's the rules, right? That's the rules. You got to get your roster.
It was like, it's too much, man. And like, who cares? And people like, man, and why don't you? And I'm like, no, this is like, who said that we got to have all these women? Right. You know what I mean? And forget. And like, I've done fuck boy shit. You know what I mean? I have no problem admitting that.
That's on record.
That's on record on the internet as well as on this podcast. You know what I mean? But, also though, I never really understood the whole like dominating thing, and not, even before I heard the term agency with regard to people governing their own space and behavior and lives, I never understood, this whole dominating thing with women. It's like, what? Like, it seems stupid to me. So for me, that's just one example. I had to really separate the difference between masculinity and manhood. Because I say for me, I'm very masculine in that I'm a huge risk taker. You know what I mean? And I see taking risk as masculine, as a masculine energy, because like you are fearless in that. Okay, I'm going to get up. I'm going to face this fear.
As far as what it means to be masculine, like fearless risk taker. As far as like the quote unquote examples.
I'll pick up and go move somewhere I never lived before, like that. Don't even care. You know what I mean? But there's women who do that as well.
Right.
So that doesn't. I don't think that. And I know many men who would never think to pick up and leave wherever they know comfortably. You know. Because they're like, oh, no, I'm good. Because, you know, especially if they, like, have some type of influence where they are, they're not going to pick up and go try something new. They just not going to do it. So I see something like risk-taking as a masculine behavior, a masculine thing, but not necessarily something that's indicative of being a man.
I think your comment is interesting, too, because that is me and my sister. I would never just pick up and move somewhere, but my sister has and will consistently. So it's interesting. I struggle with this question, actually, because none of us are perfect, right? Like, absolutely none of us are. But I've always struggled with just like the idea of domination, and I think it's because like I was forced to be in a challenging position when I was younger, and so I think my wheels were always turning in my mind around what the hell is this? Like, I don't feel right. This doesn't feel right. I actually do not feel comfortable around black men. Like it and black boys too, right? Like it was a very interesting feeling. So I guess what I'm trying to unlearn is that not all straight black men are evil, honestly. And there are some who genuinely try to like figure out what effective allyship looks like, or at least like co-conspiratorship looks like for them and for community. I think the way oftentimes people go about it is harmful. I think there's not enough listening, not enough conversation that's happening, truly, like true conversations that are happening, which is why I appreciate this podcast so much, honestly. Actually just recommended it to a couple people the other day. But yeah, I think that's the thing I'm consistently trying to unpack and really figure out like how many straight men, specifically straight black men, I even want to like be in community with many times, because it actually exhausts me. Like the role of teacher is really exhausting. And so yeah, that's the thing I'm struggling with, and I realize that I've done some wrong things, and I'm trying to figure out again what community looks like, active listening looks like among black men who may not identify with you, at least so quickly. Because ultimately there is so many commonalities there that like sexuality, like economics, I mean, a lot of them are just like whiteness that's overlapping with our community, and like we're struggling with that. We're literally fighting each other because of white supremacy.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to figure out like again what that community looks like.
I mean, you make a great point, and I want to like put a pin there because I'm gonna touch that a little bit later in the conversation as far as like what does brotherhood look like among our different identities and backgrounds. So transitioning from like our personal and kind of our upbringing and talking about like culture and media, I think for myself, trying to acknowledge my privilege as straight, cisgender black man, to me, it seems like we've come a long way in terms of representation of what black masculinity looks like now in 2020. You have Lil Nas X, who's like just the king of the internet right now and just making waves being openly queer in his space. You have hashtags like Black Boy Joy, Black Boys Embrace. Billy Porter, the first openly gay man to win an Emmy for Best Actor in Pose. You have Moonlight, self-explanatory, won Best Picture 2016 or 2017. And then you have just certain conversations that we talk about on Let's Talk, whether it's a Winston Duke or Jadena going on Breakfast Club and talking about just expanding the notion of what it means to be masculine. You have Tank, who had the hilarious but very important conversation on like sexuality, and like he mentioned as far as like just because somebody sucks dick once or twice does not make them gay. And like it was an amazing conversation. I'm glad that it's actually being had and it went viral. People are like having these conversations about this. And then D Wade openly supporting his daughter Zaya in that way that I don't know if we've ever seen on a mainstream level. Right. So I take a step back and bring all that to the table. It seems like we've come a long way. So I'm proud of those moments as far as black masculinity being represented in conversations. Are there anything in particular that you are proud of how black masculinity is presented? And are there anything that you are disappointed about as far as how black masculinity is represented in today's culture and society and current events?
I mean, I'm glad to see, I can't say I'm proud, but I can say that I'm glad to see that these nuances are being discussed, especially in popular media and among celebrity black men, this, that, and the third. But what I'm still disappointed in is that there's still an unwillingness to listen intently and just run on assumption. You know, I'll jump all the way to Dwayne Wade and Zaya versus Lil Boosie.
Yep,
you know,
exactly.
And that
for every D Wade, you have a Boosie.
He automatically
it's like a 1-to-1 relationship there.
He automatically assumed, even though no one ever said that Zaya was going to have gender reassignment surgery or begin hormone replacement therapy or anything like that. He just automatically went with it, not knowing that there's a lot of trans-identified people who don't want to do anything of the sort. You know what I mean? And I think had he just listened, regardless of understanding, because my standpoint, because most of my friend group, my network is cisgender and straight, and I told all of them, especially my male friends, like, look, you ain't got to understand. If you have a question, you know, just ask it. Don't worry about how it comes out. We'll figure out. I'm someone. I can eat that, but we gonna figure it out if we still gonna be cool. But
is there a point where you draw the line in that education? As far as like, all right, I'm gonna educate you up to this certain point, and then I'm gonna just back off.
Well, I haven't gotten a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
But I give them that open door. Like, you can ask me. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna be like, but I say all that to say, you know, you have to know that what you got to just go based off what people say. You can't assume just because of whatever stereotypes, whatever demonization you've seen in the media or in your neighborhoods about trans-identified people or whatever. You can't just think automatically, oh, well, now this person's going to identify as trans, so they're going to get a sex change. They're going to start taking hormones. That was really whack. So Boosie should have just sat there and listened. Regardless of how he may felt, regardless if he understands, just say, okay, you know what? Cool, whatever. You know, that's their thing. That's their family thing.
And think about how he's raising his boy, though, too.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
I think that's the part that was so comical about Boosie. I'm like, the last person I want to learn family values from is Lil Boosie. Last person. So.
Like, it's funny the way that like Boosie comes off, but it's also not funny. Like the way he was talking about, like, I guess his son's lips in those videos. Yeah. You got some great lips. When you get to certain, I'm like, it just seems uncomfortable, but I laugh. My first reaction is, oh my, this nigga's hilarious. But at the same time, like, that's like disgusting.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like balancing those two. It's very interesting.
It's in the same way that you hear guys say pause or something or no homo after something, but then they say like, yeah, man, but that shit was hard. I'm like, why didn't you pause that?
Yeah.
But you pause
What
this.
do you draw the line at when the pause comes out?
I was watching some guy on YouTube and he was talking about catching a ferry as far as a boat somewhere or whatever, but he said pause after that, after saying ferry. So I had to stop for a second. I was like, why you say pause? I was like, oh, because of the ferry. I'm like, really? Are you serious, dude? Come on, man. Word. So things like that. So definitely, even you bringing that up, it's just like, okay, and this isn't the first time Boosie has aired out his grievances about anything he deems as, you know, not normal for a black male person to do. You know?
And that's the interesting thing to me, especially with not even just Boosie, but we all know people like that, like just the obsession with what you claim to have such an aversion to. It's just interesting to me. Also, I think the interesting contrast, D-Wade has been all over the media, and the thing that's always been sticking out to me is like, I want to learn. I'm willing to learn. I'm trying to learn. Like, you know, and that's what he's been saying essentially.
We ain't got all the answers, Sway.
Yeah, so he's like, I don't have all the answers. I just want to learn. I want to know. Like, and I think that's the difference between him and Boosie, where Boosie just takes this very simple assumption, you know, like some very blanketed assumption, done no research on it, probably asked nobody. And, you know, we see the results of that. It's just interesting to me, like how Boosie is really, he's just worried about it. And I don't understand, like, if it doesn't affect you, if it doesn't concern you, or even if it does, why are you so worried about it? Not even just, you know, for Zaya and D-Wade, but, you know, his own kids, you know, with the lip stuff, like, what makes you want to imagine the sex life
that's
of your
wild.
child?
That's very
just
wild to me.
That early, that like it makes no sense.
It's
why
like it
are
goes
you
from the point of
policing
being
that?
an involved parent and making sure your kid or your son or your daughter has a healthy sex life, but then go to the point of like complimenting their lips and like what you could do is like okay, you can provide healthy sex advice to a certain degree, but you ain't got to go that far. Like, come on, son.
Yeah, it's like
It's
you
crazy.
about to write a fan fiction. Right? What's going on?
I should say who I really appreciate in this moment is also Gabrielle Union Wade. And shout out to them. We follow each other on Twitter. Anyways,
Oh shit! Like,
sometimes I have moments
Panther.
because they
Slight
both
flex.
follow me, and sometimes I have moments of them like at their dining room table talking about me. But but no,
You can put out in the universe. I'm sure they'll see this. I'm like, yeah, what's up, Preston?
no. So I think what's interesting here is I think about what also effective parenting and involvement looks like, and that's what I see. When I see the way they talk about their children, especially Zaya at this moment, what I see the most is like, how would it have been as a Black queer child to see this growing up? Right, we're all learning things every single day, right? Like I was born in the 80s, the 90s, and then we didn't have these conversations.
Not at all.
It didn't look. I was sharing with some young people a couple of weeks ago. I think some of the information is a little limited, right? So when I was in college, it was from 04 to 08. So there was we didn't have marriage equality. There was, not a lot of conversations around employment discrimination and in queer spaces or for queer people. They were happening in queer spaces. Mm-hmm. But it was just interesting to me that now when I look at this, I'm like, this would have been impossible to have in a public way 5 years ago.
And it's just that short amount of time, all these combos have changed.
Yeah,
it's a great point.
Yeah, and I think that if I'm proud of anything, it is that now like younger Black queer children or Black children who may not even know that they're queer or trans can look at this and actually understand that there may be a possibility that their parents can accept them. I should also share that there's a lot of privilege happening here too, right? So there is some exposure happening among the Wades, right? Like there's money, there is access, there's resources, and so the conversation may look differently for folks who grow up in the hood, for parents who may not understand what that looks like, for parents who idea of protectionism is different, right? Because they may not have access or resources. So I do want to at least underscore that there is a bit of privilege happening too. Lil Nas X is also someone that's interesting to me because I try not to say this too much, but some of it feels performative. And
interesting. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, like it's interesting because I want to believe that folks when they have exposure, they're able to finally be comfortable with who they are. Some of it still. This is not the Lil Nas X I saw in the immediacy of when he actually came out. So I think of it as two things, right? On one hand, it could be him actually like, I can finally be who I am because this is how I now identify, or at least publicly. But I'm just like, it was such a rapid change. Right. And I feel like some of it feels like this is how I've always experienced gay and bisexual Black men to be. And so now I'm going to live it in a very... It's just interesting to me, not negative.
Right.
It's just
something you picked up on.
Yeah, same thing with Billy Porter, frankly. Billy Porter has been around for 25 years. Billy Porter has not... Remember this R&B song from the 90s? Right. Like, Billy Porter was singing to Black women in videos, right? I understand the reason for that, right? Entertainment industry is different, right? There's a lot of success that happens for Black straight folks in ways that cannot happen for Black gay men or Black queer folks.
To cut you off, do you feel like it is damaging or could be damaging to a certain point in the way that it could be performative to folks who may see that as, oh, this is what it means to be so-and-so? Like, I
don't think performance is inherently negative.
Right.
Like, I think we perform in many different ways. I think a lot of times it's out of survival, frankly. And it's out of trying to experience this level of success. So can it be negative? Eventually, maybe. I just don't, the way I see it happening for them, I don't see it as a negative thing yet, but it's not to say that I don't think it could ever be negative. I think there are chances and sometimes that it could be.
Yeah.
I think it could be negative in that sometimes it will present this singular singular experience that people expect from people who identify as any of the letters.
I want to go a little bit further. We're talking about, representation of Black masculinity. And like I said before, for every D Wade, you have a Lil Boosie. For every Lil Nas X, you have a Pastor Troy. For every Terry Crews, you have a Terry Crews. Like, I often wonder, even Malik Yoba, like, it's the same situation. Right, okay, it's good, you're telling your story, but also what's else in there?
Right.
It's real. So I wonder how much... I guess I want kind of going back to the overexposure point. How much is it a good thing that we have these different representations out there, and how much is it like, how can we have even more genuine conversations about that? Like, when you see certain things like a Terry Crews turn from, oh, okay, that's amazing, brother, telling your story, but then getting to the point where like he's kind of going back on his word. I'm wondering, how do we engage in those conversations as well as like hold each other accountable for those moments in because it's tough because they're so kind of far removed. Like Terry Crews, I don't know that nigga's number, so whatever, but how do we, I guess, hold folks accountable when we, you know, applaud them for doing well, but not to the point where like they become untouchable, basically?
Right. I think that goes, I guess, along the lines of it just being, there's a spectrum of who and how we can be. On one day, we can be very on it, you know, in this particular way, but then in another way, we just might not have the range, you know? And so, yeah, I think the more we do have representation with different people, we can actually see that we can be nuanced. And just because I might be propped up in this way as, you know, kind of like a figurehead, it doesn't mean that I'm the only version of this. It doesn't mean that I'm a perfect version of this. So, yeah, I think it just comes with more, just more representation, more of us, you know, being able to come through and, you know, like just kind of be here so that it's, so that we're not always burdened with the idea of being this perfect person. Chris Rock was, on one of these documents, Chris Rock was just talking about black people in general. It's like the moment black people can like be mediocre in certain things, in certain ways, that's when we'll know we're kind of like in a good space. Because it's like, for now, we got to be perfect. You know, we got to be like literally the best ever. You know, Barack Obama got to be the best president that there's ever been. Or, you know, Serena Williams got to be the best tennis player. So I think that even, you know, when we talk about our queer brothers and sisters, they are burdened with that as well. You know, you got to be the best version or the best archetypal version of that.
So what does accountability look like for you guys in terms of when you see like a Terry Crews, and like obviously maybe we don't, maybe you know D Wade and Gabby, maybe you can get that number, but like what does accountability look like, and like how do we have those conversations where it's like, okay, Terry, you kind of stepping over the line, and not to the point where you have, again, kind of big names here, but like Jada holding Snoop accountable in terms of maybe people like us can hold Snoop accountable or like Terry Crews accountable. Like, what does accountability look like from y'all's perspective?
Well, I think first off, you got to take the money out of it. I don't know whether the proper word to use is either commodification or commoditization, but
one of them.
Right.
One of those words. Y'all know what I mean. Of black existence, regardless of however you identify in your gender or sexual orientation, it makes it difficult to have honest conversations, I think, you know, because too many of us are concerned about our own individual bottom line. And so we will go with whatever the tide is, especially too many of us, I'm not even going to just limit it to celebrities. Too many of us will go with whatever the tide is so that we can make sure that our bottom lines are stay intact. So I think that's the first thing, to have that honest conversation. If we didn't have to worry so much about, which I know that's asking for an act of Congress, but if we didn't have to worry so much about that, I think that we could have these more honest conversations. And I think that there probably would be fewer people who appear as homophobic or sexist or whatever, or vice versa, because they don't have a brand to protect now. Their audience that they have, they wouldn't have to worry about that audience, or they wouldn't have to worry about that boss or whoever. You know, that's what I would say. That's the best resolution that may never ever happen.
Yeah. What's yourself in terms of like accountability? Like, you know, obviously we're having this conversation today, but once we leave this space, we interact with friends, we interact with, you know, homies, and, you know, what does accountability look like in your personal life? Just kind of throwing it out there.
So my full-time work is in reproductive health rights and justice. And it's something that in the grand scheme of things wouldn't affect me. So when I'm thinking about like specific like abortion access, because of who I am, because of who I have sex with, abortion access is not going to be something that directly impacts me, but it's something that impacts people who I care about a lot. And so for me to get better in particular spaces, especially as a cis man, I had to get cussed out by my trans friends, frankly. Right. I had to eat it up, like realize I was fucking up. And
that humbling moment.
It had to be consistent. And I think part of it was like I had to get my feelings out of it and realize that like this is not about me centering my own experiences or privilege. It's about like if I think I'm a good co-conspirator, I don't get to define that, right? Like the communities who I proclaim to protect get to define that. And if they say I'm messing up, then I am. There's no other question about it. I can ask questions around like what accountability looks like for you. Obviously, if I'm causing harm, but I can't just be like, I'm a good ally, right? Like that's nonsense. So accountability, I really try to practice this every single day, especially in the work that I do. So when we're having conversations around like, and like this high level policy, when we're going to like staffers on the Hill, I'm always thinking about the folks who I've talked to, like, right, like on the ground in the South and the Midwest, who say, like, this is what, like, reproductive justice means for me. This is what sex education looks for me. This is what comprehensive sex ed means for me. You know, and I don't do it well all the time. And I don't think anyone who's good in policy work does well all the time. Most of us just wouldn't be willing to admit that. So again, accountability is right. It's not one way. Like it is, you know, how are we actually actively having conversations in community? How are we sharing that? And really, how are we like, right? If we take money out of it, I really think that we can have like better conversations. Because for me, there is no bottom. Like my money certainly is not the bottom line, but the community of folks are our bottom lines, right? At least they should be. So yeah, it's hard, right? We can talk about accountability all the time, but it's like, how are you actively practicing it? Yeah. And you know, sadly enough, like mine is oftentimes tied to work. But that's just because of the work that I do. So I'm sure I'll think of more as we continue, but yeah.
One story is funny, not funny. It's again funny, but not funny. New Year's Eve, maybe 2011. I was in college, 21. Definitely in that fuck boy who thought I was a good guy phase. New Year's Eve went out, was wild with a lot of my guys and a lot of my homegirls too. And the next morning, I was back at home and I got a knock on my door. 3 of my homegirls pulled up to the crib. Let's like straight up guerrilla style. I'm like, yo, we need to talk to you. And I was like, what you mean? We good. Like, we had a nice night last night. And they basically told me all the shit that I did last night that was just like out of line and like just wild and disrespectful. And I bring it up because I wonder if we'll ever get to a place where, you know, a lot of us, me and you, straight black, cis black men, have those moments where like black women are holding us accountable. Right. Like I wonder if we'll get to a place 20, 50 years down the line where that does not happen. Like these kind of coming of age stories where like your homegirl's like, yo, nigga, you fucking up. Like, what's up? Yeah. Like it seems like that's so much a part of our stories. And like I had an episode earlier this week with my guy Brandon Alexander, and he had a book about why do you love black women, talking to black men, and so many of those men had the same story of like, yeah, I was fucking up doing this, she checked me, and I got better. And I wonder if we'll get to a place when that doesn't happen in terms of like, you know, kind of skipping ahead to the future of masculinity, but like with those moments of, you know, that hurt and that pain that we sometimes cause women, where we're kind of maybe in a point where we're past it as far as maybe on number scale happening maybe for 75% of guys down to like 20%. Like, okay, we're getting better. It's still there, but we're getting better. I wonder, you know, if we can envision that or what will it take to get to that point, kind of just throwing it out as far as that
or even
trend.
To the point where it doesn't have to be the women who are checking us, but we're checking each other. You know, I think I too, you know, have had that story where, you know, like an ex of mine had to like basically shit on me until I got it right. You know, and then you, of course, you thinking, no, I'm good. And then,
that whole time I was hot. I was like, what are you talking about? Like I paid for drinks. Like, what do you mean? Like,
you're like, you know what? I don't believe you.
But like, and then it goes another level. Like it just amplifies, and you're like, yeah. But I'm like, can you believe they pulled up to my crib?
Right.
Years later, I finally got it.
Thinking about it, right? Like you really can't stop thinking about it, and then it just clicks. Like a lot of times, you really just got. Again, if you're going to be this co-conspirator, you just have to take people's word for it. You're never going to see it. You just got to be like, yo, they said I'm fucking up, so I must be fucking up, and just operate in that space. Again, I do believe we got to take the labor off our women of always having to check us, school us, you know, because like we're here having this conversation. We could easily have this conversation with the homies. But what I've found, at least in my personal, you know, I don't want the backlash from the homies either. Like when I'm trying to check, like, but I think because there's a certain immediacy that, you know, women have, they like, look, if I don't tell you this, you could very well harm me. And so like,
or other women that
right.
were in our
And
lives.
so it's like, I'll risk you being upset or whatever, like to let you know. I think we're privileged in that way that we don't have that certain immediacy to check our homies because it doesn't really affect us that way. Until we get to that point, we can just kind of empathize in a very close way that like, yo, this does affect us, you know, even if it's not personally to us. I don't know if we'll get to that point where we're, you know, able to just check our homies, like, and have,
necessary,
you know, pull up to their crib, like, yo, homie, you're fucking up,
3D,
like, you
yeah.
wildin', like, and so, yeah, I think that's a big part of it, as well. We
I'm
gotta
gonna get you in here because I feel like I see you squirming right now in your
I know,
seat.
I see it.
So I think that to break down that whole thing about the 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, I think these conversations will happen less and less, and I think that even more so when we are bad actors as black men, we'll be able to check each other no problem. I think that'll and comfortably and respectfully do it, and it's received well. I think that'll be more of a thing for a couple of reasons. One, there's a generational difference and shift in the mindset. Even maybe not even so much completely intellectually, but definitely how through social engagement, through presentation, I find. So you know, I guess I'd be a xennial. I'm on that XY. Yes, XY
I don't
cusp.
know what that
That means
is.
Generation X millennial, like you right there on the
Okay,
line.
right there in the border. Okay.
So,
we let you into our meeting sometimes. It's cool. Yeah.
you know, I mean, I listen. I'm not one to judge. I'm not like, oh, the millennials are the reason why. I'm not one of them people. You know what I mean? Because I'm old enough to remember living in an analog world still, and I remember when digital became a thing. So, you know, I'm one foot on each side. But anyway, I find that, you know, a lot of people that I grew up with may be the biggest offenders, you know, Generation X on up. But I find that younger people, again, while everybody might not be there intellectually, just in the way that a lot of the younger men dress, and the women that they date don't have a problem with that. You know what I mean? It's not this whole, like, you know, how skinny jeans this, but
Things are shifting.
yeah, you know, but younger people don't seem to take as much issue with it as people, you know, my age and older, you know, as well as even people being okay more. I find more of us as black people feeling okay, black men in particular, straight black men, being okay being around black men who don't identify as straight, you know. So I think that generational shift is happening, and the fact that this conversation is happening, conversations are happening, is a sign that there's a shift happening, that it's uncomfortable. Whenever there's some kind of major social change, a political change, there's going to be some discomfort. Secondly, jumping all the way back to when we mentioned white supremacy earlier, you know, there's going to require, which I don't know how much of this will happen because American society is very anti-intellectual and anti-curiosity, but there needs to be within the black community a decolonization of the mind, because a lot of what our behavior comes from what was embedded in us through different types of colonial experiences.
Brother. Right. Okay, brother.
You know what I mean?
Let's speak on that.
You know, like, and this is a quote that I got from the former ambassador to the U.S. for the African Union, Dr. Arikana Chambori quote. She said that, how can the formerly colonized individual negotiate with the colonizer? So we're up here fighting amongst each other in a society where much of what we're doing was learned. You know what I mean? We talk about how there's a segment of the black community that says, oh, well, homosexuality is un-African. People not doing their research.
Right.
And again, and I'm not going to go too deep into that, but there is full-on research about how that is false. And
Is that the book title that you mentioned?
it's called, the name of the book is called, I can't remember the full name, but the name of the book, if you look up Boy Wives, Female Husbands, there's some pretty good research that was gathered there, and the book was published through the Indiana University Press.
Got you.
But
And that's about
that is about how there were, and by people who were colonizers as well as people who, white people who were just missionaries doing work, whatever they were doing in Africa from throughout the continent of Africa from like the 90s all the way back to the late 17th century. And they have these findings and documentation of observation of what we consider homosexual or bisexual behavior, and the general consensus in the throughout these different communities, the tribal communities, or whether they were in the urban communities, was it wasn't so much a right or wrong thing. It just was.
Right.
It just was. It wasn't a large segment. It was also very transactional. You brought up earlier about the whole, like, if we saw more openly gay black masculine men in the media, would the conversation be different? In this book I read, they talked about how this transaction between these masculine black men having taking on these young men, these young boys who were looking for a come up oftentimes, or sometimes it was genuine emotional connection there, but it wasn't necessarily this out in the open thing. A lot of times the people in the community like, yeah, we know what happens, but they're discreet about it, so even the whole deal thing, like, that isn't a new phenomenon.
Got you.
You know what I mean? But it showed up differently. And also a lot of these communities throughout the continent at the time didn't have words to describe what we describe as different, behaviors. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I say all that to say, going back again, we got to decolonize the mind, which it could be very difficult living in the American society because, we have to get along. And I don't even know how we'll necessarily be able to build our own space and our own ways of being in the U.S. But I guess we'll figure it out sometime. Yeah. But that's what it's going to take. Those two things. I know I went on a tangent, but I as you both were talking, I wanted to put that out there because I find that that's really the biggest difficulty, because we're aspiring to attain what has been taught to us and considered what success looks like by people who don't have our best interests
and
never
what masculinity looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
And never had our best interest at heart. And so we still have yet to define what blackness in America in particular looks like in a lived experience. Right. It's always been mimicking, okay, well, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to shoot for this, very individualistic. We don't even speak to people that we don't know. All these different things. You know what I mean? So I think that's what it's going to take. And it sounds like a lot of heavy lifting, but it's going to be a slow build. This is like, we got to start thinking in terms of 100-year plans. You know what I mean? So it might not happen in our lifetime, but I think it is going to get better just by these observations that I've made and the things I know that we need to do as people.
So you mentioned that one textbook that you mentioned in terms of how there's a long history in Africa of these type of folks, wherever they were in Africa. But for some folks, when they hear that, they're like, I still don't care. I'm still going to be
absolutely.
And it's like, I think I'm interested in this question of like how to really reach folks, because I mean there's a certain segment of folks, you call them hoteps, you call them whatever, that I don't know if we're ever going to reach. Like they're going to be in this section over here still committing this harm, and it's like, do we focus on those individuals, or do we focus on people who may be actually able to receive some information? Because I often question, like, okay, I think a lot of us, not a lot of us, but many of us are on Twitter like, oh my God, these fucking hoteps, and I can't believe they said this shit. I'm like, how much energy can we really spend trying to reach, kind of come back to like black men who are committing certain things but are unwilling to change? Like, how much are we actually going to spend time on that versus maybe some guys who kind of still have some beliefs but are maybe working through that in a way that could be malleable in a sense? Like, I'm often wondering about that conversation.
I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. The last election cycle, Bernie Sanders was like on the trail or whatever, and Black Lives Matter rushed the stage, and everybody was so upset at Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter group, because they're like, Bernie's on our side, why'd you do that? And their response was essentially simple: if Bernie's on our side, he's the one we should be rushing. He's the one we should be holding to the fire, because we're not going to waste our time on anybody else because they're just not gonna get it. So I think that's the approach we do have to take. Just realizing that. As sad as it is to say, everybody ain't gonna go. Right. Like I always think of, the idea of, Noah's Ark. Like, you tried to warn some folk,
Yeah.
Everybody ain't gonna go.
Even with the whole repatriation to Africa thing, like everybody isn't going to go, everybody isn't going to want to go, everybody can't go. You know what I mean? But that's okay because there's still a great deal of people who will want to go. There's a great deal of people who are open minded enough to listen, and you work with them, and that is what oftentimes dictates societal shifts in thinking. You know, now, you can have people come in and have laws and things like that, which ultimately is why, you know, we in the Black community feel the way we feel about the queer community and what have you, and anything that is not cisgender or straight because of colonization again, and, you know, laws that were implemented. But even at some, you know, but all of this, focus on who gets it.
Right.
Do as little. Don't work smart. Work smarter, not harder. You know, if you can skip the heavy lifting and go straight to the people who got it, boom, do it like that. You know what I mean? Because there's some influential people within these circles of open-mindedness, you know what I mean, that will, you know, carry the message on. People like, you know what? Well, maybe, you know,
yeah. And I think that's how movement building works. I think about it this way: like, imagine you're like throwing a party and you really wanted a couple people there and they never showed up, but you have like 50 people there, right? I try to tell people, and I've had a friend who like complained that a couple people were not there, and I'm like, you have 50 people here, right? Yeah. Like, and you're not focusing on any of them because you're so mad that these 2 people aren't here. And so I think about it that way. And again, just going back to work a little bit, and the work that I do not target conservative offices. I never will, right? Like, our organization is specifically focused on like progressives and the moderates because we know at least we can move the moderates, and we know the progressives by and large are at least on our side. And so, I mean, I appreciate the Sanders point, right? Because I remember this exact conversation and folks were frustrated because he was, you know, quote unquote on our side. And that is where you work from though. Like, you can be frustrated because they're not like completely on your side for every single issue, but those are the folks, especially on issues that matter for you personally. Like, I'm huge for things around the criminal legal system. So it's like, if your policy platform does not focus on that, even if I like you as a candidate, I'm going to challenge you more than other candidates because I'm not going to get them, and I don't want to. Exactly. Like, they're not the ones I'm going to focus on. So does it mean that you throw everyone others away? Maybe not, right? Like, I think there are some people who can engage with them. The way my patience is set up, I'm not that person. And so I know that the people who I need to work with are folks who, you know, maybe we don't agree on everything, but there's something about like our connection that they will at least be more like understanding, right? There's at least understanding that I am queer, but I'm also Black, so that makes me Black, right? And I'm able to have these conversations with folks. There are some people who like, right, if I share what, right, like the cesspool of certain parts of Twitter around like being openly Black and queer, it's like for some reason I'm no longer Black, right? So like, those are people I would never try to convince. Like, I would never want to work with you because we're so dissonant already that there's no middle.
Question about that. I agree with the point. Like, some people in their hate you're just not going to reach. But then I guess what do we do if, I guess, the violence that could come with that? Because if we say, okay, especially speaking to Black men for this conversation around Black masculinity particularly, what do we do if the guys that we say, oh, these niggas not going to reach, but they still doing all this shit that affects us, affects Black women, affects queer folks? Like, how do we stop that violence?
I don't think those are the everyday forms of violence, though. I think the forms of violence that are actually like widespread are people in this room. In their mind, and we don't really see them as violent acts. But I think if we actually really listen to marginalized folks, even within the Black community, we'll see that the harm that's occurring consistently is not necessarily the man who kills a woman because she didn't give him his number. That is certainly a very vitriolic and ridiculous response, and it's hostile and it's violent and should be dealt with. I think by community, because I'm an abolitionist, but also, I truly believe that the harm that we should be discussing are the everyday harms, right? Like the idea of some folks who are like extremely elitist and believe that, you know, poor people shouldn't have iPhones. The people, like, to me, that's harmful, and it happens every day. But we've accepted that harm because it's normal, right? We've normalized like how we treat folks experiencing homelessness. We've normalized how we experience poor Black folks. I think that is the harm that we really need to come to terms with. But again, because we think we're so good, we don't, and we're always focusing because it's like that's not us. And because we push off that's not us, we don't focus on our own harm that we contribute.
I love that. Want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm with that. I think sometimes a lot of the normalized violence that we perpetrate on a daily we don't think of it that way because, again, we want to think of all of the trouble as being these very outside on the fringe situations. Like you say, some bandit just coming out of nowhere and, harming somebody, when it's like, no, it is in the way that we speak, or that we willfully will deny a person the pronouns they're asking you to use. These sorts of things, they matter. And, even in the jokes, how we post on Twitter, how we decide that, okay, I'm a cis hetero man, but I'm just going to dress as a woman and create this caricature of a black woman that's going to go viral. And now that's another propaganda of how people are going to perceive black women. Like those sorts of things, I think we don't think of those as the things that are violent, but they are. And they change the way people think. And then they do make it easier for somebody to decide, I'm going to physically harm somebody because all that has been kind of stored into me, it allows me to write this person off a lot easier than it would have been if people weren't misgendering people, if people weren't just using the sort of language. Language in and of itself can be such a violent thing that we don't really check as a violent thing. So, yeah, I'm with that. Like, I agree with that.
Okay.
I think it's a matter of us. I part of me for sounding just coming off so metaphysical and all this other stuff.
Go there.
Yeah,
Go there.
Let's
get weird.
Actually, I'm not. Nah.
Hyperimpose the
Let's get
kente
weird
cloth after the video's done. They had a little
Hey man, that's a good cloth right there. Kente cloth ain't cheap, man. That's some good quality shit right there, man. Don't sleep on the kente. But
you gotta realize.
I think because we collectively don't recognize our innate power in terms of our existence and our being. We consider ourselves inherently powerless, and so that violence continues because we just pick and choose who. It's like bullying. It's just like, oh, well, you're a little weaker than me,
Right. Mm-hmm.
but I don't. So I'm gonna pick on you, even though I'm just like, but ultimately we all kind of fucked up. You know what I mean? But so you're basically being a bully because you don't have this power that you want to have from that you see these other people that are pulling strings or whatever the case may be, they have, which is whack. But I think that in itself is a big contributor to the violence that we day to day, through the elitism, through the caricatures, through whatever the case, through picking on a community that might be even more marginalized. And then it's like, it's the strength in numbers, you know what I mean? And if we're doing it all under the black community's umbrella, it's just like we're breaking each other down. And so I think that the first thing we got to do is just understand, like, respect and kindness for one another. Do that first, and then we can do some other things that go beyond us. But until that day comes, I don't know if and I hate to give this doomsday theory, but
the world's gonna end.
I think in terms of I think in terms of reality and objective thought, it's just like I don't know, but like I know what it would take. Respect and kindness. People. These conversations wouldn't happen if we were respectful, kind, and compassionate. Offered a little more compassion and just willingness to listen. Then we'd be okay. But until then, that violence is going to happen.
Do y'all think, as far as these conversations, I think a lot of us, I know for myself personally, I spent a lot of time on social media, especially on Twitter, and sometimes I'm wondering about sometimes the tone that we're using around certain conversations, especially for somebody like myself. Straight black dude, and I know for a minute when I think the moment that I figured that I got it, I talked in a way that was almost like putting down other folks that could potentially get it as well.
Like, you ain't up on this woke,
right? Like y'all niggas just ain't getting it, and I wonder how important tone is in these conversations as far as actually trying to reach people that we can actually speak to, especially coming from acknowledging the privilege that we do have and trying to communicate it in a way that's not gonna make someone feel like they're just a piece of shit. Because there is like the men are trash conversations, and sometimes I feel like, and we've had plenty of men are trash episodes on the podcast and talking about black male privilege, but I often wonder about just the effectiveness of certain conversations, especially when they're being had by men. Like, I don't care if women say men are trash, do your thing. I don't give a fuck because you receive most of that hurt.
Right.
But in terms of when men are having these conversations, it's like I understand that saying men are trash shuts off so many people.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the effectiveness when you have like a room of guys in the room talking about these certain things in the certain tones that we speak with sometimes when we feel like, oh, I get it. So you other niggas, y'all got to get this shit too. And why y'all lagging? So I wonder about how do y'all feel about the tone and the way we speak to each other as far as having conversations like this?
Yeah, I'm with you. I admittedly, and to anybody who I did it to, my bad. I've been hella flagrant on Twitter. You know, like when I think I know something, I think like, you know, you get it in and
get these bars off real quick.
Right?
Like,
yeah, like it's almost like a Batman thing. It's like I'm beating up bad guys. You know, like I don't feel bad about hurting
just
them.
shut them
You're
down.
like, oh, you're a piece of shit. Like, but like, if we are really in a space where we are trying to actually, you know, convert people, so to speak, to try to get them over, we got to be more strategic in how we speak and talk. I think I'm with you where I feel like there are certain groups who have earned the right to just say it how they feel like saying it, you know, because again, they got a lot more skin in the game than we do. And it is far more a matter of life and death for them, to where politeness ain't really, we ain't got time for that. Right. But I think we, you know, it's, you know, like cis hetero men, like, we can, you know, take the time to kind of navigate a little more to kind of speak, not in a way that we are congratulations, bro. You know, like you've
unlearned your privilege.
Right.
Now you're working for the betterment of our community.
We ain't got to do
sticker for that.
Yeah, we ain't got to do it that way, but like,
congrats for being a good person type shit.
Right. Yeah. Like we're not giving participation points on I think we're past that. But like, so I saw my psychiatrist not too long ago. We were talking about how we speak to people and how, you know, I was having a conversation actually with my mother, and she was really receptive of it a while back. And he was speaking about how the way I was kind of speaking, where I was using I statements versus telling her what she did, what you do, how you do it, you know, kind of just changing it a little bit, like, this is how I feel. Mm-hmm. This is how that makes me feel. This is how we do. And even something as subtle as that can change. Because, again, there's violence in language. And if you're always talking about what you did, people are going to defend themselves all day, and sometimes in some very heinous ways. And once you start swinging back at me, it's like, oh, now we get these bars off, you know?
Preston, like, I want to talk to you because I know you've been known to get it spicy on the Twitter. And sometimes I'm like, damn, Preston going in right now. How do you navigate that when you talk about what you want to talk about, who you're reaching, who you're not reaching? Does that ever factor into, okay, if I say this a certain way, or do you even think about that when you're putting stuff out there? Okay.
I don't. So I've come to a conclusion a while ago that my platform is to protect marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. It is not to protect the feelings of folks who may be offended by something. Mm-hmm. And I think that's strategic. Like, because I think that the second I open the door to just allow anyone to have a conversation about anything with me is where a lot of harmful things can be said and occur. And the people who follow me, I know, can experience triggers as a result of just anything being said. So I try to curate something to me that feels safe for folks who are marginalized, not just for an open conversation, which is why I'm very clear on my social media. I'm like, my page is not your democracy. Gotcha. Like, I will delete your comment. I will block you. Like, if anything feels like it's
what you mean as a black man, how are you going to speak to other black men like that? What
block,
you mean, Preston?
block,
What's
up? I didn't even see that comment that you just made because it's blocked.
Here's the truth. So I'm of two minds, right? Like, one, I completely agree that I think we need to be strategic in how we're having these conversations, how we're pulling people along, right? Especially if we're thinking like long term, like how are we building a community for folks long term? But I'm more of the belief that I'm exhausted by tone policing, because tone policing only affects folks who oftentimes are trying to challenge other people. Right. And so I have to think about things in a couple of different ways, right? In the same way that I will give us the open freedom to talk shit to police officers and you should still be protected and alive, I'm going to give that same view to trans women who going to cuss somebody out so you will respect their pronouns so they can make it alive, right? Like, I have to view it that way, right? It doesn't change because it's intra-racial or intra-community. Now, again, I think the strategy looks different, and I think it comes from a different place. The one thing that I always share with folks is, like, the day that I die, even if you may have had like a spicier interaction with me, I pray that you eventually know it comes from a place of love. And for me, that love does not look like niceness all the time. It doesn't look like kindness all the time. It looks like being like aggravated. And sometimes the one thing I want to make clear is, like, when folks are righteously indignant, they are hurting.
Right.
They're speaking from a place of pain and personal experience, and that's when I think we need to listen more.
Yeah.
It's not to be defensive immediately. So I know there are folks on Twitter who like, I ain't gonna ask him nothing, and then there are people who DM me literally every single day to say thank you for making this space that you make, and those are the people who I do this work for. Ultimately, we will be someone else can build, right? Like I think y'all can probably build.
Yeah,
like,
that's where I'm at. Like,
there are people who are meant for that, right? Like who know their privilege and try to unlearn it and unpack it every day. There are people like me who I know I have privilege and I've decided what to do with it. And for me, again, it's to protect folks. That's not to like protect feelings.
Right.
It is to make sure that that your material conditions are good and that you can live a life.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But
I got a question for y'all. What
I like this.
Like, look at me. I'm the captain.
Fellow podcaster right here.
is there a certain demographic or number of characteristics that the black men in particular, or even black people in particular, who have this opposition or vitriol to any of what we're talking about right now, that they have? Are they coming from poor communities? Are they college educated? Are they this that do you find that there's a certain type of black person that is most opposed, or no?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's somewhat across the board, because I feel like, I went to Hampton, so like I know as much as I love Hampton, love my Hampton bros, but like there's still like even like a quote unquote educated black man, there's still like a lot of unlearning that we got to do. So even in that system of like a system of privilege, being educated at Hampton University, there's still like that unlearning. So I don't know if it's set to a particular demographic, especially being in this culture of masculinity and manhood. If you're groomed in that, obviously of varying degrees of kind of economic status, but if you're still groomed in that, you're going to carry a lot of that shit in whatever kind of setting you're in. So I don't know if it's set to a particular demographic within black folks. I don't know.
Okay. Right. Oh.
So I agree, but I also do wonder if it is something that happens more in poor black communities. And again, it's not a judgment more than it is, I think, I have to say I think they in that instance are surviving differently and trying to survive differently. So like it does remind me like some of the things that I've heard growing up around like boys should be masculine, or at least how boys and men interact. I didn't think a lot of it was homophobic per se. I think it was like, this is how you survive being a black man. Now, does that mean it could also be homophobic? Certainly, right? But I don't think that was like, that was their intent, at least. So I struggle with it a bit, but I do think, if you're experiencing a lot of, if you're experiencing a lot of different things through oppressive systems, I do think you're trying to figure out how to navigate and survive as much as you can. So like, if it was like a poor black like man talking to his father, talking to his child, a black boy, I think I'm just curious whether I really believe a lot of that is out of like survival and love, and it's out of survival and love in the way they were probably taught or not taught, and trying to figure it out themselves. And I do believe that there are a lot of homophobic wealthy folks, right? So they're clearly not absolved from any of this, but I do believe that money can afford you the ability to be blind sometimes, or at least blinded by certain things that other folks aren't dealing with, or are dealing with, that you don't have to.
Or consider other perspectives.
Correct.
It's one less thing you have to worry about in terms of survival.
Correct.
Yeah. Anyway.
Correct.
And you make a perfect point as far as how like a lot of what certain folks are taught about masculinity is at a point of out of survival, because we know the impact of being in certain communities, just being black in general. We know what it's like to just work out of a sense of survival. So I think that's one point in terms of like trying to talk to other brothers in terms about this, because their approach of masculinity is like, I have to do this to survive, and not necessarily, in tune with how the ways that you're out of survival impacts people in your community on that same level, black women, queer folks. And that piece, I don't think, is always a part of the conversation.
I want to be clear though, because I do think that can still be harmful too.
Of course,
right?
of course, yeah.
Because a lot of it is putting the onus on you and on other people who may not necessarily be masculine, as opposed to talking to like other folks who are actually going to be causing harm when they see like a feminine presenting person or like a feminine person. So I don't think like necessarily you trying to survive is somehow like you're not absolved from like causing harm because of it, right? And sometimes I think we may cause more harm because we're trying to survive, and that means we're navigating harm and trauma differently. But I still believe that like we need to do the work of like talking to other folks, because I shouldn't have to tell somebody like, you know, maybe you shouldn't wear that. You know what I mean? Like because like I should be like, you know, fuck these niggas who gonna talk shit about you, because I'm gonna be there to protect you if they do say something. Like I wear short shorts every summer. Like consistently. And it's amazing how many times I've heard like just expletives. And my friends are like, how do you just walk around like and not care? I'm like, listen, if I'm gonna die, at least I'm gonna die happy. Like I'm gonna fully show up as myself. And this is not just like in Southeast, right? It is in Northwest at brunch on Sunday Fun Day, right? Like this. So that's why I'm like, you know, I think we all are dealing with like harmful masculinities just generally from folks who may have a little bit more wealth, from a lot of transients to DC. I mean, in fact, I've probably been shown more love when I used to live in Southeast more than like places like PG, more like. But and that's just real though. Like, I mean, honestly, like growing up, I love the hood though. So it's like growing up in the hood, it's like this is home. Like this feels safe, and they've made me feel safe. That has been my experience in other places in DC that have more wealth, frankly.
No, I absolutely agree with that. You know, and witnessed it myself. Everything you just said, I witnessed it, even to the point where I still see fewer, say, black, gay, queer, identified men who show any public display of affection walking down U Street than I do white, gay, queer, identified men to this day. And even when I do see it, I subconsciously I get concerned for like, oh man, like I don't know who gonna come out the shells and try and, you know, hurt y'all. You know what I mean? Which is I wish that I didn't automatically have that trigger. I wish I was at a point where it was just like, okay, two people who care about each other, whatever, and go on about my business. You know, but I definitely agree with you there, because even we're seeing I'll be in certain hoods on the south side of town or any hood, and I've seen, you know, trans women getting along fine, you know, cursing out this person, that person, you know, shooting the shit, joning, whatever, you know, and then you go into the land of respectability politics known as Prince George's County, Maryland, where I'm from. Everything is a problem. That is not conservative. Everything is a problem, you know. So there's that. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, I think again, somebody who born and raised, you know, around the way, you know, in the hood. I think I believe that there are certain just understandings you can get by having a little more access to education, be it college education, or just even, you know, broader horizon outside of your neighborhood. But again, I think it's everywhere. And there have been times where, you know, again, the idea of survival, so to speak, I think it contextualizes why people do it. It doesn't necessarily, like you say, absolve them from it. It just gives you an understanding of why they do things the way they do. It's across the board. I don't think it's any either way.
Yeah. Okay. One kind of part of this conversation that Geronimo brought to the table about end of last year, sent me this article on Race Baiter, and I want to get the authors' names right because I want to have them actually on the show at some point. Joshua Breon and Saki Benabo. He sent me this article with the title "Good Men in the Mythological Dichotomy Between Toxic Masculinity and Masculinity," and in that article, they flat out say masculinity inherently is toxic. And I want to bring that to the table in terms of how do you feel about that? And I'll get into some details of the article. But how do you feel about the statement of masculinity itself inherently being toxic versus it being something, as they put it, because I talk about healthy masculinity on the show a lot as far as being an alternative. They actually in the article say that healthy masculinity is respectability politics in terms of you're just trying to put a happy face on something that's already toxic being masculinity in itself. So that's a mouthful, but do you believe that masculinity in itself is inherently toxic, as they put it? It's such an interesting conversation in terms of what we aspire to exist in. I'm a masculine man. Like I want to be a healthy masculine man, but it's a different perspective I haven't really considered before.
So this is a hot take that I am going to make
Let's get it.
on the spot. I agree. I really do, just because in the sense, I don't know if I agree with the ideas of what is masculine, what is feminine being this very essentialized thing. I think we name what we want to name it. So, I mean, you know, like, just because I'm like, I come from a long line of women who we would call alpha women. All of them very well, by society standards, masculine. But if they're all that, you know, like, how could I really say that, oh, that's a masculine trait when like it's literally just all women who are being what they've known to be? So, yeah, I think the ideas we have around, I guess, how we name masculinity, how we kind of categorize it, so to speak, it is an attempt to kind of uphold what we feel are patriarchal tenets, so to speak. And I mean, if that is this very white concept, which I believe it to be, then yeah, it's inherently toxic. We can't really like inextricably link it. And it doesn't say that us as men, we are inherently toxic, but it's just to say the things that we try to lord or raise over others, it could be anything. Like, why do we even have to name it or have the dichotomy of what's feminine and what's masculine? Because like I said, my father, he ranged from beating his kids just because he got angry all the way to, you know, giving us the most love and affection, you know, I'm in his arms at 16, 17, kissing on each other, like, you know, like, and so I wouldn't categorize any of that either way. He just, like I say, just is.
Geronimo, because you sent me the article and we kind of briefly talked about it. What were your thoughts when you read it? And we can just talk about a little bit what we shared there in that DM conversation.
So when I first read it, I was like, okay, especially when they brought up the terminology of hegemonic.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes,
when they brought that up, I said, okay, this is a thing. And I agree with you, Rasheed, and even how I said earlier, you know, I think the toxicity comes with constantly attempting to define and attach masculine and feminine to man and woman, and manhood and womanhood. There's a lot of revisionist history, a lot of intellectual dishonesty, a lot of selective and cognitive bias that's taking the cognitive dissonance that's taking place when we do that. And if we just look at it as people just are, it wouldn't be as bad. But the toxicity comes in constantly trying to define it and like, this is what you should do. I think it also comes out of that whole survival mechanism, more so than anything that's being triggered from like muscle memory or innateness or DNA or anything like that. You know, so that's what I see it as. So it was a lot. I had to, because I read it a second time before I came here.
If you're watching this, definitely check it out. It'll be in our link in the description below. But like, it definitely stretched my imagination in terms of like, okay, you know, I think I'm quote unquote doing a good job here. We had an episode on healthy masculinity as like an alternative, but then in their article they blatantly say, as far as what their particular take is, healthy masculinity is buying into kind of respectability politics in terms of this is just a healthy face on something that's already toxic. So I don't know how I feel about it. I think one quote that I wanted to read as far as what we talked about, that they said near the end, betraying masculinity and manhood as structural entities that subjugate and other non-masculine and non-men and the inherent traits that come with it entirely is the first step to us ending patriarchy.
So I was actually going to bring that up because I was like, well, I think that any and everyone in the black community who is inherently qualified and most informed about the matters should be fighting. It should. I don't think cisgender men should be taken out or of that equation, of that fight at all. So you know, I disagree with that statement.
Okay. What about you, Preston? Bringing you in here a little bit. Is masculinity toxic? Hot take. Let's go. What's up?
So
I'm still on the fence about it.
So
like, personally,
shout out to Herte who founded Race Bader. So I am inclined to agree, and I think I'm inclined to agree. I need to fully read the article and digest it, because the one thing I always say, I used to say like masculinity isn't inherently toxic. It's the negative manifestations of masculinity. But then when I think about it, I don't think I have positive characteristics to masculinity. Like if someone was like, what are your positive characteristics to masculinity? I'm like, I don't know if I think anything about masculinity is inherently positive. So I think that's why I'm inclined to agree. If you ask me about femininity, I actually could list off several that I think are like actually life-saving and affirming. But again, it's because of how masculinity shaped me from a very young age. So I just, or at least my perception of what masculinity was and is. So I mean, I'm inclined to agree. I wish I could flesh it out better, honestly.
No, it's definitely something we come back to.
Yeah.
I mean, even when we think about, like, if we are looking at this under the gaze of what is healthy masculinity, so to speak, if we run off like what the tenets that we think they are, they're probably feminine. Like, if we really, they're probably things that we
standards of what
if we're like, oh yeah, healthy masculinity, a man is nurturing. Like, you know, it's like that's usually what we say about femininity. Like, everything I think that we, you know, like go out like, oh, he's not violent. He's like, these are the things that we would already attribute to femininity anyway. So again, my idea is just like, why not like just take the naming away from it in general? Because, you know, it's not gonna.
Damn, so I gotta change my podcast tagline. A podcast on black identity. Like, what do I gotta do? This is identity crisis 101. Like, what's up?
It's one of those things where it's like,
this is
again,
not good for the brand.
Nomenclature is just a weird thing where it's like, it's still gonna be, you know, like before we named the chair, it was still a thing you sat in, you know, like it was still just what it was. And so, yeah, I think that's where we get hung up. And I think in the name in and of itself, we do kind of get to this point where we leverage certain things because, you know, we are under the patriarchy. So masculine things are given a higher premium than what feminine things are. So if I am a masculine man, even performing femininity, I'm going to have, you know, like we congratulate they way more. Like, you know, women are nurturing, but like when you see a man holding a baby, it just do something different for some reason. And I don't think that's an inherent thing. I think we're socialized to just believe that it's an inherent thing.
Yeah. I think something I definitely still struggle with, and I love having the conversation on it because I think like so many of us buy into like, I'm a masculine man. I love my masculinity. So in that last line that we kind of talked about, I wonder in terms of like, and it kind of gets into like, you know, strategy and best ways to communicate and impact people and all that. In terms of like betraying our allegiance to manhood and masculinity being, as they put it, a step to ending patriarchy, I wonder how kind of effective that would be to like, okay, all right, guys, Saturday's the meeting. We're going to end patriarchy. First thing you got to do is betray your manhood and masculinity. I don't know how effective that is,
because it leaves you on an island, so to speak. Because like,
because you don't know what the alternative is.
I was going to ask that. What is the? So I'll read the article, of course, but is it just saying that it's inherently toxic, and then what? Like, is there?
It's just like deal with it.
Go
to your therapist.
Is there a call to action?
I have to go back and refresh that. I think something as far as our conversation, we were still kind of up in the air as what the call to action would be. Like I said before, I want to reach out to them and have them on the show. But I wonder how, just in terms of, okay, if we're going to do this, I agree. Like, I think if we hold on to these notions of manhood and masculinity, it's entirely toxic as far as what we claim to be manhood and masculinity. I think for me, I've always heard, okay, healthy notions of masculinity, we can redefine it. And what you said, it always sounds like just, I don't think it sounds feminine. It always sounds like just being a normal, good person. Like loving, vulnerable.
But I wonder that too, right? Because if masculinity isn't inherently toxic, well, we have to think of healthy versions of it.
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah,
it's essentialized that way.
Because I don't hear. I mean, even the idea. There's this like it's not surprising, I guess, because if you have toxic masculinity, of course, men are going to be upset and they think there's such
toxic
thing as
femininity.
but we don't think of like what are the healthy versions of it? Like, because I think many of us have actually believed. Many of us here actually believe that femininity is like not inherently a bad thing, like, and it's something that's consistently under attack.
Yeah.
So, but masculinity is like, if we have to actually think of how do you rethink it differently? How do you make it more like honorable? It's like, well, are we actually saying that it is inherently toxic? And I think we are.
Well, two things. I say that I won't call them, say there's such a thing as toxic femininity. I don't want to identify anything as toxic. All right. I think there's expectations that some women hold of men that are unhealthy, and that is due to some conditioning as well. But I think many men, when it comes to this, well, what's the alternative to any type of masculinity as we know it? What's the alternative? I think some people are waiting for permission to be able to define themselves. I think that's that's what's going on. They're waiting for permission.
So going back to like the
for
Issa
somebody
Rae
to
reaction.
say, you know what,
Right.
it's all right. Like whoever they think is the most masculine man, who's the straightest man out there, to say, you know what, brothers, it's all right. I did X, Y, and Z. I went through such and such and such and such.
Who's gonna be that man? Not Terry
like
Crews.
I don't know.
Like we gotta can't wait for permission to define your life.
Right.
You know what I mean? We can't, and as a whole community, we can't wait for permission to define who we are. You know, we just got to do it. You know what I mean? I think that's the greatest form of power right there. That in itself is masculine, not waiting for permission to do something. You know what I mean?
I wonder, because I think we do have some examples of that where people are at least trying to like push the envelope a little bit by sharing some of who they are. I mean, so I do think of like, was it Tank that said like, if like men, like if you suck a couple dicks, then you're not
Right.
Like I think. So I agree with that because I believe because I think about what literally sexual activity and sexual behavior and sexual orientation is, and they're not all the same thing.
Right.
And I think for people who understand that, no one was like shocked by it. It was just like, well,
Makes sense.
But for some people who are literally like, nah, you suck one dick, you're gay.
Right.
Right.
It's like only women get to
Them's the rules. Those are the
experiment
rules.
and see what it is that they like.
17 years ago.
Right. That don't count.
With men, it's always
To be
finite.
fair,
Right.
Even Insecure, this episode pissed me off.
Right.
actually.
Oh, I hated that
Around
episode.
bisexuality,
Yeah.
right. When he's like, I don't even think I consider myself that I had sex with, or somebody like basically sucked my dick
Right,
when I was in
yeah.
college. And Molly like, all right, you're a little gay. I mean, like that's kind of what the reaction
Right,
was.
right.
So I think, that's interesting actually for Insecure, or even discussions of black masculinity, to have that kind of what I consider a biphobic episode. Maybe it was intentional, I don't know. But even stuff like that, right? Like it's interesting who actually gets the right to dictate their own experiences, who has the right to actually be sexually expressive and free. And it does not oftentimes apply to black men, frankly. Like black men do not have a chance. We straight black men, I should say, actually, do not have a chance to really be expressive or free without being considered gay or
Even just entertaining the conversation.
Right,
That's
yeah.
what Tank did. Tank didn't even say
And
he
everybody
did it.
just
Right,
assumed
He just said he just
you must have
entertained
done
the
it. Like,
conversation.
Because the thing is, it's like, why are you thinking that way, right? People, that's how people are. Like, why do you think that way?
And the
Oh, we
It's
caught you.
like-
we caught Tank.
Yeah.
He told himself.
And it's
Yeah.
like
Crazy.
you thinking about it. Like we've all had thoughts, even if it's nothing that I'm not trying to like exercise or even act upon. It's like all your thoughts have just been what we call straight thoughts. You've never
Right.
never thought like, oh, that's a handsome person. Like you just
Right. If you-
always think straight. Like you don't police your mind that way. Like and
You wouldn't even be able to think. You wouldn't be triggered to even think another man is handsome if you were 100%.
Right.
You know,
like it's just don't work that way.
It's-
And again, getting from that naming of what is masculine, what is feminine, like I don't think on a spiritual level, on a mental level, we even work that way. I think it's, the world does kind of put all these barricades and blocks inside of us. And then, our thoughts and our emotions are kind of processed through that. But I'm like, I just know we don't function that way. Like, and so it's weird that we have to function that way and that we have to kind of name everything. When again, like, come on now, like if like taking the Insecure episode, like if he one time experienced head from another man, like are we really going to categorize that in the same as somebody who is like okay, and just they're naturally attracted to men that way. That doesn't even make sense to even have the same naming for that, but we do. Like we all log it under and that's how it's so weird. That's how it's been. Like way back, I don't know way back when, but like the ideas of what was gay, it was such a broad range. Like if you did stuff with animals, if you did stuff with kids, everything was just considered gay. You would think it was like a little fourth grader, but like, oh, that's gay, that's
gay or
Like,
unnatural
but
or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And so like the naming of it, of course, we've narrowed it down now, but it's still just naming. Like that's ultimately what it is.
We'll have to make sense of this for it to exist in their brain before
Yeah.
they just let somebody else exist freely.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so.
So I think I'm still TBD on the is masculinity inherently toxic. I gotta just download a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I do agree. Actually, I'm good. I agree. I'm there.
Yeah, I'm there for sure. And again, I think the biggest part of it is with most things where somebody kind of challenges, ultimately there's a lot of undoing of who we've rooted our identities in. So that, it's like how you were saying, you were joking, you're like, well, what do I name the show now? Like, there's so much work we got to do after somebody is like, yo, you know what? That's actually made up. You're like, nah, don't do that. Like, now I got to like rethink all of who and how I am. Like, I built myself on this all these time. It's like if Michael Jordan would have tell you, like, you know what? I actually cheated every game. I never worked hard. Like, you'd be like, hold up, man. Like,
crushed your
what,
dreams.
right? Like, you
Exactly.
now got to think about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't even play like
You
that.
can't be the
right?
greatest
He's
who
like,
ever did it.
let's
actually not
Right, he's like,
funny at all.
let's cut that out of the footage. Actually.
So, in terms of this conversation of masculinity, where do we even see this going 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the line? Like, will we still be having a conversation on masculinity, femininity, and trying to fit into these boxes? And I guess looking forward to the future, what does that look like? Like the future of masculinity, the future of manhood, womanhood, non-binary folks. Like, what is, in terms of like this conversation, what does the future look like? And what do we hope to see when we're old and gray from folks who look like us?
I think we are trending towards a far more fluid society, just in so many ways. What you can wear, how you can be, who you can love. And I think that's where we need to be. I do think we need to get away from a lot of the barriers that kind of restrict us, that repress us in ways that tend to, animate in ways that harm other people. So I think the more we're able to kind of just flow the way we need to flow, the less we'll feel the need to, work out our stuff on somebody else. Because ultimately, that's what I think a lot of our harm does to other people. We're working out our own understandings on other people. And sometimes we do that in harmful ways, and sometimes we do it in healthy ways. But like, if we're going to get rid of a lot of the harm that comes to a lot of our marginalized groups, we have to expand our understanding of it. Like, even with the Boosie thing, if Boosie had just a less narrow understanding of, just trans people in general, he wouldn't even make the ignorant statement. If he just understood what sex, sexuality, and gender were like three separate things, he probably wouldn't have made the statement, wouldn't even be thinking the way that he thought. But like, because he doesn't have that range, so to speak, he didn't. So I think the more we move forward, the more we will be fluid, our minds will expand, and we'll be in a good space, hopefully.
All right, so I'm gonna ask both of y'all, in 2020 now, in 2060, when maybe not on Twitter as much, maybe the panels are slowing down. Where do you envision, when you pass the work off to somebody else, where do you envision this going? I'll start with you.
Oh, that's a small question. I mean, I would have to. I would have to agree. The work that I think we're all doing is to create that world, right? Like, where we're not consistently like talking to people around the violence that they are enacting on other people, and really creating a space where folks can live freely and love freely and be liberated, though I do think that's a loaded term. But I really just want folks, and I hope by 2060 we are able to just kind of see folks as who they are, right? I want to be able to tell a man he's handsome without telling me thanks, but I'm not gay, right? Like, okay,
Right.
cool. Sorry for you, but that's but I respect who you are as a straight person. But yeah, that's the society I want to see, right? Like, not this like immediate defensive reaction to like a compliment, or just like being upset that someone is actually protecting their daughter, right? Mm-hmm. Like that. I think that's why this Boosie situation with D-Wade frustrated me so much. So I'm like, what do y'all want him to do?
Right, yeah.
Like,
Kick his child
is he
out.
supposed to be kicking Zaya out? Like, I was like, I'm really confused on why now we're frustrated that someone is protecting their child. So
Everybody want to be a girl dad, but nobody want to be a girl dad.
Right.
So that's one of the first things I called out, and I was like, "What? Y'all just a girl dad?" Now y'all mad? Okay, well, cool. But that's by 2060 what I hope we can see, and I think we'll get there as long as we keep having these conversations and pulling people in, and calling people out and in. I think we'll get there, but not in my lifetime.
Like, my director's telling me we got to wrap up soon. Geronimo, any final last words on the future of this? The pressure's on you.
Focus your anger and whatnot on the people truly at the root of what creates these issues and these concerns that people have, instead of being bullies. Yeah. That's all I say. Again, a lot of what we know is through colonization. What was taught to us. As much as people say homosexuality was introduced, or the toxic masculinity is not a bad thing. All of these things were introduced to us out from outside of us as black people.
Yep.
So, focus on who introduced all this homophobia, or whatever the case may be, to us. Anything that's troubling us, that's causing us to have these constant divides within the community. Let's focus on where all that came from.
True. Facts. I love that. Wrapping up a little bit here. Once again, thank y'all for joining us on this first video episode of Let's Talk Bruh. Trying to venture out into new lanes here, do some visual content. Do y'all have anything that y'all want to plug or let the people know about what y'all have going on personally, creatively, professionally, and maybe 10 seconds or less before we get out of here?
I'll be the social media correspondent for Black Love Experience DC.
Okay.
So make sure y'all come out March 21st. You can check my Instagram, preston.mitchum, for more details.
Okay. Cool.
Peace. Nothing happening. But you can follow me on Instagram. So when things do pick up, that's Sheed Emilio, SheedEmilio. Yeah, I'm there.
Cool.
So I'll actually be at Black Love Experience speaking on a Black culture panel as well. So I'm excited about that. Black Love is one of my favorite events. So as Preston said, March 21st down at the Arc in Southeast, come there. You can also follow me.
Where are you these days?
I'm around. I mean, you could, on Instagram, and if you're a Facebook person, you could follow me at Geronimo Knows. Like, I know stuff. Geronimo Knows there. You can also follow all the Fly Kids on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, just like it sounds. All the Fly Kids, urban culture, lifestyle, all that stuff. I'll be back doing some creative stuff soon.
I feel like you got rid of the Twitter, didn't you?
I got rid of my personal Twitter.
I was like, where's this man's account?
Because I don't know.
Frustrating.
I don't got the personal Twitter touch like I used to. So I just focus on all the Fly Kids Twitter now. You know what I mean? I can handle that a little. I'm not like you. Not like I can't get. I can't galvanize the people like I used to.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's where I am.
I respect it. So wrapping up a little bit. Once again, thank y'all if you're listening. If you're watching, you know where to find Let's Talk Bruh. Let's Talk Bruh on Instagram. Let's Talk Bruh Pod on Twitter. Shout out to all my guys in the Facebook group. Let's Talk Bruh podcast group on Facebook. And yeah, we'll holler at y'all next week. Peace. Thank you.
Peace.
We didn't go all this way.